The origin story is a popular narrative in our culture these days. We all like to be reminded that our heroes came from somewhere like us, that they were once small before they were big. In this sense, Tomb Raider is, well, average. Breaking it down, however, we get something more. There's a story that's equal parts heartwarming and heart-wrenching about a young girl who's struggling to become the woman she's meant to be. I'm your host, James Tabor, and today we'll see a story that shows us not only do heroes begin as humans, but once they've become heroes, the good ones stay human after all. Anyone who's familiar with the Tomb Raider series knows the type of game it used to be. A fun but flat... Not like that, clearly. A fun but flat as in uninteresting story starring Lara Croft. As a character throughout the franchise, she's been rather unremarkable. Gun-toting and adventure-loving, but there hasn't been much development. That changed with the 2013 game. As I said before, origin stories are in vogue right now, and Tomb Raider 2013 offers one for Lara Croft. She starts out as an archaeology grad student, trying to prove her thesis by venturing to Yamatai, an island wreathed in the legend of the Sun Queen. As far as the story goes, this one's pretty straightforward, but it's complex enough to form an arc. The main character, Lara, begins with a goal to study the island and straighten out the legend of the Sun Queen. Then, after the ship crashes, the first plot point, her goal changes to one of survival. Later, when confronted with the fact that escaping is tied to the island's legend, she sets out to unravel the mystery. There's more to it than just Lara Croft's story, though. By exploring the area, you can slowly begin to uncover the story of the island itself. You find journal entries from previous inhabitants, cave paintings and stone carvings, and some basic cultural icons that suggest what's been happening on Yamatai in the thousands of years since the Sun Queen. These items and the story they tell give great depth to the narrative, particularly by the way they're found, in hidden alcoves and old dilapidated buildings, places with history. They're not necessary to enjoy the rest of the game, but they help you understand the nature of the island's curse without giving up a sense of mystique. That last part is important, because without it, games that feature enigmatic settings lose their luster. Sure, by the end of the game we have all our questions answered about the Sun Queen and Yamatai, but there's just enough left unexplained that subsequent playthroughs possess that thrill of exploring a dangerous and unknown land. We'll discuss this a bit more later. The real strength of this game, however, is its strong character development. Lara Croft is the most developed, obviously, and her character arc is a good one. She starts out as a timid but determined grad student, lost in her work and with only one real friend, the camera girl Sam. She argues with the leader of the expedition, James Whitman, but the only reason she wins is because Conrad Roth, captain of their research vessel, was a friend of her late father's. When she first arrives on the island by way of shipwreck, her first instinct is to reach out for help from the other survivors, but then she's forcibly separated and must learn to survive on her own. Even as she locates her fellow survivors, one by one they prove untrustworthy or unfit for the hard fighting she endures trying to secure their escape. Whitman especially seems like a terrible person to have at your back, and is primed to become the Scooby-Doo style villain until you meet this guy. When Matthias, the killer cult leader, kidnaps Sam, Lara makes the decision to search for her. This is a major point for Lara because it shows off her determination. While paired up with Whitman, he turns into a blubbering fool while Lara keeps herself on task. She's no longer hiding while the cultists hunt her down. She's actively resisting them while looking for her friend. This is where we see Lara become a survivor and start to grow into the action girl that we've always known. The game's mechanic of acquiring equipment helps prove this out. At first, you just find equipment and use it as is, an old bow and a pistol picked up off a dead cultist. Then you begin to build improvements yourself, culminating in fire arrows and grenade launchers and even incendiary shotgun shells. But throughout this development, Lara never stops being human. She doesn't become some one-liner spouting unstoppable whirlwind of death. She's still scared, she still makes mistakes, but she's learning to confront her fears and deal with them. The real proof of who Lara's become is at the end, when she rescues Sam and escapes the island with the other survivors. She's determined to follow in her father's footsteps, rather than dwell on the ghost of his memory. This is what sets her down the path that we see her walk throughout the series. But she retains her human side. She misses her father, and she's affected by what happened to her on Yamatai. She'll probably be waking up in a cold sweat some nights, remembering Alex and Reyes and Whitman, all the people she lost there. But these memories also won't drag her down. Instead, they'll galvanize her into becoming an action archaeologist, much in the same vein as Indiana Jones. Aside from Lara, if you consider the characterization that her supporting cast receives, albeit through the secondary literature lying around the island, all the characters are very well fleshed out. Whitman is a scene-stealing jerk-ass, but it's a desperation driven by getting older, losing his wife, and generally not being as famous as he used to be. Reyes is harsh because she's a devoted mother. Alex only seems suicidal because he wants to impress Lara. The list goes on. The main exception, however, is Captain Roth. He's the gruff mentor who's been a friend of the Croft family for years. Throughout the game, he plays the obvious father figure for Lara, but there's no secondary material that sheds light on his state of mind. This is a deliberate choice, not allowing the player to know what Roth thinks or how he really feels. It leaves you able to decide for yourself what his motivations are. On the one hand, there's nothing to suggest he isn't as benevolent as he seems. On the other, it casts suspicion on his potential motives. I'd be surprised if this doesn't come up in the next game somehow. On the subject of Yamatai itself, there isn't much more to say. It certainly qualifies as a meaningful setting because all of the plot details and all of the character motivations are tied into the island's existence. If the island didn't exist, the story as it is couldn't have taken place anywhere else. Try to imagine it set in Manhattan and it falls apart. And when you take it a step further and consider Yamatai's supernatural aspect, the vaguely magical but largely unexplained storm is a good way to introduce an unreal element to this universe. You're not beaten over the head with sorcery, but at the same time, it isn't explained away either. It retains that earlier mystique. But it's the relics you can find scattered across the island that give it special significance. The presence of actual historic artifacts give it a place in time, and the narrative they provide helps the audience believe the island could actually exist. Depth is a word we're going to be throwing around a lot in this show, but depth of setting is particularly important for immersing a player in the world. If you can make it feel larger than it actually is, the player will feel like there's room for them in the world, and they'll be all the more invested in the outcome. So as Tomb Raider literature, the story may not be complex, but it doesn't have to be. The island of Yamatai offers a compelling and integral backdrop for the events of the story. And, most obviously, the characters are all well developed and undergo change as the story progresses. By the metrics of story arc, character development, and meaningful setting, Tomb Raider definitely qualifies as literature. But there's one more thing to consider. Does the narrative surpass the gameplay? There's a lot we could look at here, like the lack of an in-game HUD except in action sequences, but I want to bring us back to the weapon building mechanic. As I pointed out earlier, you start by finding weapons and tools pre-made, but after that, Lara starts building her own and modifying existing ones. Equipment upgrades have always been an important part of many games. They allow the action to continue without feeling stale, and they offer the chance to go back to earlier areas with newer, better equipment and find secrets or bonuses you couldn't access before. It's typical of this subgenre of games to have a leveling mechanic present and offer such rewards for skilled or dedicated play. But the main narrative aspect of where and when you acquire new weapons, plus modifying them using the skills Lara learns as the story progresses, ties in so closely to the mechanical aspect that they're almost seamlessly woven together. So I can say without reservation that Tomb Raider 2013 is literature. More than that, it's a wonderful entry into the action survival genre, and the core of what I hope will be a new, deeper reboot of the Tomb Raider franchise. Next week, we'll journey to the world of Tamriel and examine the latest entry in the Elder Scrolls series. Until then, game hard and game safe. Thanks for watching. The discussion continues in comments below, so feel free to join us. If you like our show, please like and subscribe. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, or even send us an old-fashioned email.